trigger happy and I give less than a fuck. Love me or hate me, I'ma show enough, rip shit up. It's Mr. Nothing, nice on a mic stand. Mic in the left and the zest in my right hand. I took a puff, had enough now, hold up. If that was Indo, niggas getting rolled up.
What's going on, folks? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review Missy Elliott's basically most successful album, Miss E, So Addictive. Had a number of singles on it, at least 5, and really had pretty much one, basically I would almost damn near say her biggest hit, and Get Your Freak On. It's been all over movies and stuff, and you definitely probably heard this song, especially if you even remotely know Missy Elliott. But a number of things about this project was it was large enough to the point where most of the time Missy Elliott pretty much always gets to the second single. She's done it on basically every one of her albums. But for the most part, this was actually a time where she tried going a little bit further and pushed forth and gave us like a full album that lasted for probably longer than 3 or 5 months or something. Like the rollout for this album was probably the largest out of all her albums. That's why I kind of assumed that this was like her biggest project. To me, it definitely feels that way, and it has a lot going for it. At least 2 big hits. I mean, really, this had a bunch of singles, but at least 2 top 15 singles in America from this project, and lots of pretty noteworthy guests also. It was pretty festive and stuff to the gills, especially for early 2001. This project came out before 9/11. Aaliyah was still alive when this project came out, and there was just a number of stuff. It sounds kind of dated looking back, and I'm going to get to some more of that later on, but I definitely would have to say it's good for like yesteryear, from like the turn of the century type music. Because when you look at like typical rap albums from like 1999, 2000, early 2001 and such, a lot of it was kind of prior to like the more kind of 50 Cent in the Club type Dr. Dre productions and Eminem's Without Me and that type stuff. I mean, production kind of smoothed out more as time went on, but this is kind of more in like a stark kind of, you're lucky if you get 2 singles off an album type thing. And that, I mean, even for example, like when you look at Ludacris comparing his Back for the First Time album to his Word of Mouth album from 2001, the difference was just very vast in terms of like the overall kind of more varietized and more eloquent production that went from Back for the First Time with Ludacris was very stark compared to Word of Mouth, which just had more vibrancy in it, and it got to 4 singles. But Missy Elliott did the same thing. I'm eventually going to get to like her prior 2 albums to this one, but I wanted to review this one just because of the largeness of the Get Your Freak On song, and I'm basically going to cover her whole catalog. But she had a couple of new tricks also to kind of say that. I was kind of like, God damn it, because Aaliyah wasn't on this project, but I do kind of feel like she has like a somewhat replacement vocalist who kind of is like a good buddy of hers called Tweet. And she's kind of like this cute R&B singer that was kind of there in like the early 2000s, but Missy Elliott and her teamed up on a number of songs. I was really kind of like, fuck, because I wanted, you know, it would have been great to have gotten like a 3-verse song with like Missy Elliott, Tweet, and Aaliyah. Aaliyah is nowhere to be found on this project. I mean, Aaliyah and Missy Elliott were good friends, and Timbaland was kind of another person that was good friends with those sorts of folks, but Aaliyah's nowhere to be found, and she dropped an album in July of 2001, but it really feels like a gigantic, I mean, it's not going to detract from the score, but it feels like a pretty large missed opportunity that Aaliyah was nowhere to be found at all on this project. It would have seemed like you get occasionally where you'll get like E40 will always do team-up records with Too Short on most of his albums and that type of stuff. But I feel like with Aaliyah and Missy's kind of strong friendship, it was kind of like a real slight that Aaliyah was just nowhere on this project. And it's kind of the same thing. Admittedly, when I reviewed Aaliyah's 2001 album several years ago, Missy Elliott was nowhere to be found on that one. So it was kind of, I definitely think if Missy had been on Aaliyah's album, that probably could have resulted in a pretty high-powered single also. It would have been good looks for both of them if they would have weaved together and have done that. But all right, to talk about some of the singles on here, there's 5 of them, like I was saying. So this is definitely the most promoted Missy Elliott album. But the first single was Get Your Freak On. Pretty instantly recognizable beat. This sounds like a nice kind of lighthearted club bop in a lot of ways. Real simple, kind of like hip-hop almost. It doesn't feel like hardcore rap as much as it feels like hip-hop. This nice kind of guitar licks in the song and stuff. pretty much, I'd say for the most part, like I said, most of you probably heard the song. It's been in movies, a lot of movies throughout the 2000s and stuff. Just overall stuff. It's pretty easy to hear and pretty widespread rap song. Definitely was one of Missy's most recognizable songs. So it's an easy hit. Definitely, I would say it's got to be on her greatest hits album. Lick Shots was the buzz single. It's not technically the second single, but it was big enough to be like a buzz single. I really felt like this was like a nice kind of summery type beat. This not quite as distinct as Get Your Freak On, but had like nice kind of, I mean, it kind of can get maybe tiresome in some cases, but it's not quite tiresome to where it's noticeable. It's just not as addictive as Get Your Freak On. I feel like I liked it. It definitely feels like a nice summer bop and a nice song to kind of groove to in the dance club. It is kind of a dance club song, lightly, not quite, I mean, it's not quite as ferociously dancing as much, but it does kind of feel like you might have some drinks in your system, a couple beers, something like that. Just easy to notice. It's a boiler by Missy Elliott. It's something that gets things started, but like I said, it's like a buzz single, so it's just kind of one of those ones that gets you out your seat more so than already being out your seat, if you get that. So, but then the pace kind of changes a bit because we start introducing like some R&B type stuff, and it's a nice angle from Missy Elliott, kind of seeing that she can do R&B rap flavored songs. So I definitely appreciated that. 1 Minute Man, great title, great song topic, being a minute man and sex and stuff. And I would have to say, it's just an overall good song. I definitely like the beat on there. Ludacris fit the song extremely well, and I would have to say this is an overall good taste. I definitely like the singing R&B flavored Missy Elliott. It's a good touch. I would like to kind of see her do. I mean, obviously, it's difficult to say if she'll return to music, but these are the sorts of songs that was a nice, charming point that kind of wound up being the surprise hit of the album because of how good it was. It was just a very good concoction there. Something I would recommend for Missy to continue doing in that sense if that would have happened. And Takeaway is the next one. This is like completely R&B flavored. Doesn't even attempt to kind of like Minuteman was at least like a light club song, just an R&B club song. But Takeaway is strictly kind of bedroom boom, kind of, you know, slow jam kind of R&B. This is really a down tempo song, and I would have to say it kind of reminds me of Sex Room from Ludacris off the Battle of the Sexes, just a 10 years sooner version of that. I do like the beat on there, very syrupy. I appreciate it. Genuine does a good song on here, and this is one of the songs that has that tweet chick that I was talking to you about. Yeah, just overall good R&B flavored song. It's nice that it's on here. It's too bad that it underperformed because it's pretty decent. Not as addictive as Get Your Freak On or Minuteman, but it's like serviceable. It's definitely serviceable. And then the fifth single, that was kind of more, you know, hats off to getting to the fifth single, but it was kind of more of an international hit more so than in the United States, but it's called For My People, and basically takes it back to like the vibes that Get Your Freak On had. Not quite as an addictive beat as Get Your Freak On, but definitely has like the same tempo and pacing of that song. And Eve does a pretty good job on that song. She fits the song well, so it kind of is like Get Your Freak On with like a guest rapper on there. Definitely kind of another rowdy rump shaker, I would have to say. So that works pretty well. Definitely like so to recommend if you are a fan of Get Your Freak On, you're like, I need another recognizable song that's not Get Your Freak On, and I don't really want a slow song, I would recommend For My People, because that's basically almost like a 1-2 punch. It's close enough, you know. So that's kind of the situation. But now the problem I have with this album kind of got a lot of rave reviews, but I really feel like the more thing about it is I just think people were more exuberant and excited about the fact that it seemed like it's jam-packed with as many singles that actually happen more so than the actual hits. Because this album is severely lacking album cuts, has 16 songs on here, or really 14. I mean, I guess minus like the interludes, there's like 4 interludes on here. 1, 2, 3, and then an additional one with the higher ground. So yeah, there's 4 interludes, 18 songs, so 14 songs on here, minus like the 5 singles that I've listed for you and like 1 other album cut on here. I'm also going to say like the Minuteman remix is pretty good. Jay-Z did an excellent job. It just felt great to kind of get like an actual, I mean, Ludacris is a lyricist, but Jay-Z really prides himself, especially he really kind of is like a premier lyricist, so it felt good to get that Jay-Z one. But really, out of the whole album, the only album cut I felt like had any sort of taste to it, and barely at that, this is kind of an almost song for me, is Ecstasy. Now, when I said I would like more singing Missy Elliott, she kind of delivers on Ecstasy, but the beat is kind of serviceable. It's not as addictive as 1 Minute Man, and the hook is kind of needs work. I mean, Tweet was the one that did the hook for Ecstasy, but it's not as good as Minuteman. I mean, really, it kind of felt like B minus list to the point where it almost gets kind of grating and kind of irritable. But it's serviceable, and especially if you're on like ecstasy or some sort of drug or something when you're getting laid and stuff. But I kind of feel like it's just not quite as like synchronized and quite as melodic as it probably needed to be. It definitely couldn't have been a single just because it felt just a little bit too grating for like the concept of it. But I did like Missy Elliott singing on the verses. It had like the right taste of what to do, but the execution just was not quite up to snuff. So that was kind of the concept. But really for the rest of the project, some awkward kind of beats like Step Off and Slap, Slap, Slap and Scream, aka Itchin'. I mean, there was a lot of moments on here that felt kind of awkward and just kind of like, it's kind of like back in the day when you buy an album for like Ice Ice Baby or like Keep Your Head Up by Tupac or something, and those type moments where you basically bought the album for the singles, and that process and that formula was still kind of somewhat there it seemed like back in early 2001. Like you look at like Genuine, some of those cats really kind of had those kind of vibes where, I mean, back in early 2001, albums kind of had more of those type vibes like that. That's what I was talking about with like the Ludacris vibes I was talking about before with Back for the First Time. But this album is just very severely lacking with album cuts, and there's just a lot of awkwardness on here and just records that just kind of don't have like a good moment to listen to. Pretty poor production, awkwardness, and trying to figure out what to do. And even when they attempt to do the club, like I feel like Timbaland was not quite as premier producer later on as he was not quite good a producer early on as he wound up being later in the 2000s. I mean, he kind of found himself a lot more, especially on like, some of Missy Elliott's later records, but it did not have like the same punch and distinction. And considering that Timbaland basically produced every song on here, I mean, he definitely knocked like Get Your Freak On out of the park, but there should have been way more beats that were as addictive and just quite simple hip hop kind of festive bops like that. I mean, Get Your Freak On is a bop. I definitely feel like that's a bop. And I feel like 1 Minute Man is pretty clever and just original in what it was doing. But there's not quite enough moments that quite catapult this album to have enough extra moments that kind of come close to the singles. And that's just kind of the thing about it is they're pretty poor in terms of that. It's kind of dicey in terms of what to listen to. It just does not have quite the flavor or the punch that the singles do. And it's not so much like this album is bad, because it definitely isn't, because it had like 5 whopping singles. You would think that it's a bona fide smash, but the problem with it is it's that's just, it was typical of records back around 20 years ago and 25 years ago. If it had 3 singles, that was enough of a reason to spend the $13 on it. That's just kind of the thing. But that's kind of the concept. So it's just typical of old school fashion of like R&B and hip hop back in those days. But it did have 5 singles, and they were all good. So you pay attention to that, and it's kind of like, well, that should be serviceable to kind of say that you're getting essentially 5 hits that are basically all great. It's just you take your pick if you figure that to be good enough for something, or if you want like the album cuts also, because some, it just depends. But so I'm gonna give this album me liking. I'll go ahead and list for you the 7 songs out of 14 I enjoyed. So that would be 1 Minute Man, Get Your Freak On, Take Away, Lick Shots. Ecstasy was an almost song. I'm kind of undecided about that, kind of on the fence about it. 1 Minute Man remix with Jay-Z, and then the 5th single, For My People. So really, I'd truly say it was really only 6 songs, because if you count just the 5 singles, the 1 Minute Man remix, which is essentially the same song just with Jay-Z instead of Ludacris, and then Ecstasy, which I was kind of on the fence about. It's kind of like, so basically you're just getting the 5 singles and nothing else. There's nothing of any otherwise worthwhile note to really speak of. And that is disappointing, because Missy Elliott later on would pack her albums with dance cuts, and minus like Get Your Freak On and For My People, that's in pretty short supply. So that sucks, because that's Missy's forte. But so I'm gonna give this album a 4.5 out of 10. I feel like I would give it a higher score. I mean, me liking exactly half the album, you would think that I'd give it a 5, but considering the fact that I did not like any album cuts on this whole project, minus the 5 singles, it's kind of almost a mild disappointment, because I would have really liked to have had some extra other bona fide cuts to kind of surprise people with, to show folks that would be new to this sort of thing. And there's just not really any tricks to really do that. So it's just short-lived. I mean, like I said, if 5 singles is enough to kind of make you happy about that, because it's got possibly 5 radio numbers, but there's just really nothing else. So the social score, I will give like a 7. Actually, I'll give it a 7.5 out of 10, because yeah, it did have 5 singles. The social score is how well it plays around your friends and folks that you're kind of being outgoing and that sort of stuff with. I mean, I feel like Get Your Freak On and 1 Minute Man are definite bona fide hits that are pretty instantaneous, but Takeaway is kind of debatable, especially if you're not around women. And Lick Shots is kind of a buzz single, but it kind of works off and on. I mean, it's not quite as instantaneous. And then For My People, it just depends. I mean, it's good, but it's not outstanding. So that's kind of the concept. It's like a 7 out of 10 song, but it's just, that's kind of the subject there of paying attention to that. So 7.5, despite the fact that it had 5 singles. The Future, the most recent Missy Elliott project that came out was in 2019, and I reviewed that a little while ago. And I have to say, I still anticipate new Missy Elliott music. It'd be a good thing to kind of get more, even if it's only an EP. So we'll have to see what happens there. But here's another Missy Elliott project scratched off that we've gotten taken care of.